What's going on, guys? It's Greg here, aka NYPrepper. It is Thursday, January 8th, 2026, and I have some breaking news to share with you guys. Right now it is 13:43 Eastern Time here in the United States, and we have some major breaking news coming in from all over the world. So in case you missed the news yesterday, the US seized a Russian oil tanker that left Venezuela. It was shadowing this oil tanker for the past few weeks, and this tanker was sailing towards Russia, and it put up a Russian flag indicating that it was under the protection of Russia. And I don't care what anybody says, the Russians actually sent a diplomatic request to the United States to stop following this tanker and to avoid seizing this tanker. Okay, so this was under the protection of Russia. Russia had dispatched a submarine and various Navy warships to protect it, and we moved in and seized this tanker before the Russians could get there. Okay. So yesterday, the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, said that this was a fake Russian tanker and that this basically wasn't really Russian, but that's not true because the Russians actually put out a diplomatic request, a formal diplomatic request to the United States not to seize this thing, okay? So this is a huge escalation between Russia and the U.S. Here we have video footage. You can see the Coast Guard cutter on the right side, the white boat, that's the U.S. Coast Guard, and then the big tanker there. And late last night, we had some very concerning radio communications. So Raven Rock Mountain Complex in southern Pennsylvania, right next to Camp David, sent out a radio maintenance call. And if you're not aware of what that is, basically radio maintenance is just like a radio check. They're checking their radios to make sure it works, and Raven Rock put out a radio maintenance call late last night, and it got a response back, possibly from another bunker, because the response back had no call sign. The response said, "We have you loud and clear. We're good here also." Now, typically when U.S. strategic forces or strategic command or nuclear forces in the U.S. communicate, they use a call sign of some type. But the fact that the response had no call sign is very concerning. That means that probably another bunker that didn't want to give away its location basically was communicating with Raven Rock, okay? And if you don't know what Raven Rock is, it's a Doomsday bunker for the Pentagon. Okay, for the Defense Secretary, it's also known as the Alternate Pentagon or Alternate National Military Command Center. That's where the Defense Department would order nuclear strikes from. In the event of a nuclear war, they would be evacuated to Raven Rock, and that's where the Defense Secretary would be ordering nuclear strikes on behalf of the President from, okay? Also, right around that same time, there was encrypted data on the primary U.S. nuclear war frequency. So, guys, things are really escalating. We also have Iran. The situation with Iran is escalating. We're now hearing that Australia is telling its citizens to leave Iran immediately. We're also hearing that last night Russia evacuated their embassy in Iran, and they sent 3 planes to do that. And we're also hearing from various Iranian and Arab intelligence sources that the U.S. is preparing to launch a large-scale air campaign against Iran, in which Israel would also take part. Okay, so large-scale air strikes on Iran. And 2 U.S. officials told the New York Times that there were no Russian naval vessels nearby when the U.S. Coast Guard boarded the Russian tanker. and the U.S. Coast Guard encountered no resistance or hostility from the crew on board. And the British Defense Secretary John Healey acknowledged that Britain assisted American forces in intercepting the Russian tanker. And also yesterday, the U.S. Coast Guard intercepted another tanker in the Caribbean. It was a Panamanian-flagged ship by the name of Sophia. Apparently, it was falsely flying the flag of Cameroon, according to a U.S. official who spoke to the New York Times. And Alexei Zuralov, a Russian nationalist politician and member of the Russian parliament, called for Russia to sink ships of the U.S. Coast Guard in response to yesterday's boarding and seizure of the Russian oil tanker Marinera in the northern Atlantic, stating to attack with torpedoes to sink a couple of American Coast Guard boats. Normally, they guard their shore several thousand kilometers away from it. I think the United States, which is in kind of a euphoria of impunity after the special operation in Venezuela, can only be stopped now with such a click on the nose. Wow. And we have some major breaking news coming in from here in the U.S., several major headlines, but the biggest one is that Trump is going to be increasing our national defense budget in 2027 to $1.5 trillion, guys. That is absolutely massive, okay? He said, I have determined that for the good of our country, especially in these very troubled and dangerous times, our military budget for the year 2027 should not be $1 trillion, but rather $1.5 trillion. Wow. That is just massive, guys. The last year of Biden, our defense budget was like $850 billion or $880 billion. So this is going to be almost double what it was in 2024. Okay, that is just a massive amount, and clearly Trump is preparing for World War III. And Trump spoke with the Colombian president on the phone yesterday, and he said it was a great honor to speak with the president of Colombia, who explained the situation of drugs and other disagreements that we have had. I appreciated his call and tone and look forward to meeting him in the future. Arrangements are being made between Secretary of State Marco Rubio and the Foreign Minister of Colombia. The meeting will take place in the White House in Washington, D.C. So, big news there. Looks like maybe they're going to be able to work something out with Colombia. And Vice President J.D. Vance said President Trump is willing to go as far as he has to with regards to Greenland. He said Europe has failed to contend with the fundamental argument the president and the entire administration have made. Greenland is critical, not just to our national security, but to the world's security. People don't realize this. The entire missile defense infrastructure is partially dependent on Greenland, okay? And he's not wrong there. However, we do have a base there already that has radar systems in Patufik Air Base, and we used to have the Thule Air Base there. If we wanted to, we could build missile defense systems there already, okay? But we do have radars there. That's where we used to have our early warning radars during the Cold War, and now we have a digital phased array radar that points towards Russia. But of course it would be beneficial to have more missile defense interceptors placed in Greenland. However, in the event of a nuclear war, you're not going to be able to shoot down, thousands of warheads, okay? We only have 100 interceptors, and 4 of them are committed per target. So, that's only 25 targets that we could potentially hit with those 100 interceptors, okay? So unfortunately, there's no miracle when it comes to nuclear war. Just because we take Greenland doesn't mean that we can suddenly put 5,000 missile interceptors and shoot down all of Russia's nukes when they come over the Arctic. That's just fantasy. That's not reality. Okay. And 8 Republican senators have now publicly come out against recent hostile statements by the White House towards Denmark, as well as any kind of military action against Greenland, including Senator Jerry Moran of Kansas, Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Senator Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky, Senator Tom Tillis of North Carolina, Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana, Senator John Curtis of Utah, and Senator Susan Collins of Maine. So 8 prominent Republican senators are speaking out against any kind of military action against Greenland. And some of you guys may not like this, but I do not agree with military action against Greenland. That is totally insane, and that would make us no better than Putin or China or Iran. Okay, we don't want to become our enemies. Okay, we don't want to start invading and conquering. That's not what we do as Americans. Okay, now if we work out a deal with Denmark where we buy Greenland, or maybe we expand our base over there and we have some kind of agreement, obviously there's nothing wrong with that. But going in and invading Greenland is just, in my opinion, crazy. And if you don't like that, I don't care. And Black Hawk helicopters were seen flying over the Minneapolis area as National Guard units moved into readiness for a possible deployment as protests swell in the area. So the governor of Minnesota is saying that he's going to deploy the National Guard to Minneapolis after the ICE shooting yesterday. And there's tons and tons of information about that. I'm not going to get into that. I really don't want to. It's just not that interesting. I personally believe that this could have been also a staged incident to try to divide the country. Okay, the left versus right paradigm. You now have both sides of the aisle going crazy about this. You have the left saying that the person in the vehicle was murdered by the ICE agent, and then you have the right saying, well, they deserved it. They were blocking an operation, and it's just, you have to kind of step back and not react emotionally and think about it logically for a minute. Was this a staged event to get us to hate each other more? And Minneapolis public schools have been closed for the rest of the week amid public safety concerns after the ICE shooting. So we're going to be monitoring the situation live. If anything happens, I will go live and update accordingly. And federal authorities described the shooting as self-defense, stating that the ICE agent fired after the woman's vehicle moved in a manner that posed a threat. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem said officers fired defensive shots after the woman attempted to ram agents with her SUV. Noem said the person who was shot, her name was Renee Good, was engaged in an act of domestic terrorism. Local officials, including Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, disputed this account and called for federal agents to leave the city amid ongoing protests and preparations by Minnesota Governor Tim Walz to deploy the National Guard if needed. And China hacked the email systems of U.S. Congressional Committee staffers, according to 2 sources that reported this to the Financial Times. A Chinese hacking group has compromised emails used by staff members of powerful committees in the U.S. House of Representatives. The Financial Times reported on Wednesday, citing people familiar with the matter. The group, nicknamed Salt Typhoon, accessed email systems used by some staffers on the House China Committee, as well as aides on panels covering foreign affairs, intelligence, and the Armed Services Committees, the report said. It did not identify which specific staffers were targeted. So these are some pretty serious committees, guys. Foreign affairs, intelligence, armed services. I mean, this is all dealing with military and intelligence stuff that they were able to hack into the assistance of the representatives, their emails. Okay, very, very serious. And right now, this afternoon, we currently have a U.S. nuke sniffer up in the air over Nebraska. And interestingly, it was flying with its flight tracker turned off for some reason. These planes can detect radiation in the atmosphere. Also, at the same time, a Cobra ball was deployed from Stratcom headquarters in Offutt Air Base. And Cobra balls detect missiles and can track their trajectories. So for both of these planes to be up in the air means something is going on. I don't know if it's related to the seizure of that Russian oil tanker, and if they're just concerned that Russia may try to retaliate against the mainland U.S. Who knows? We also have a large number of aerial refuelers off the East Coast. Specifically, 2 of them were off the coast of Norfolk, Virginia, and they were doing a bunch of loops here. And then there was another one off the coast of New Jersey. This is pretty uncommon. And earlier this morning, we had well over half a dozen British Eurofighter Typhoons fly up to the North Sea. And I think this was related to the seizure of that Russian oil tanker by the U.S. Coast Guard. So it looks like the British had sent Typhoon reinforcements to protect the Coast Guard. But we do know that the British were involved in the seizure of this tanker, probably providing support from their fighter jets, okay? We also had 2 heavy aerial refuelers fly from North Carolina to Qatar last night. This could be related to operations against Iran. And then late last night, we also had a very rare Polish intelligence broadcast that was audible pretty much globally. So this was a very powerful broadcast. The signal strength was very strong, and the only reason you would do something like that is to update all your agents in the field worldwide. And specifically, it was in the Russian language. So Polish intelligence has different broadcasts for different languages. I assume the Russian language version is for Polish intelligence agents deployed in Russian-speaking places. Okay, so they sent out this broadcast. Let me play this for you. So she's just reading off numbers, okay, Vosim, which is 8, so in Russian. So this is very, very serious. Polish intelligence updating their Russian-speaking agents suddenly last night, shortly after that oil tanker was captured. And the Trump administration warned Venezuela's Interior Minister Diosdado Cabello to cooperate or face potential targeting. Okay, and I'll update you on what he had to say, but he made some statements yesterday that were kind of defiant of the U.S. And Jesse Waters on Fox News did an interview with Vance yesterday, the U.S. Vice President, and he asked, how did taking out a dictator help the average American? And Vance immediately said, first of all, what it means is we are going to be able to control the incredible natural resources of Venezuela. So J.D. Vance not keeping it secret that we're after the natural resources, just like I was saying, guys. Venezuela has the most proven oil reserves in the world compared to any other country, okay? And Trump said on Wednesday evening that he expected the U.S. would be running Venezuela and extracting oil from its huge reserves for years, and insisted that the interim government of the country, all former loyalists to the now imprisoned Maduro, will be giving us everything that we feel is necessary. and he said this in an interview with the New York Times. During the wide-ranging interview with the New York Times, Trump did not give a precise time range for how long the U.S. would remain Venezuela's political overlord. Would it be 3 months, 6 months, a year, longer? And he replied by saying, I would say much longer. Wow. And according to sources close to the White House, Venezuela will indefinitely ship sanctioned oil to the United States. And U.S. oil firms are demanding serious guarantees from Washington before committing to major investments in Venezuela. According to the Financial Times, one private equity investor who specializes in energy told the Financial Times no one wants to go in there when a random tweet can change the entire foreign policy of the country. Okay, so they're demanding serious guarantees from Washington before investing billions and billions, okay? And then Trump's going to change his mind overnight. And while standing in front of a picture of Simón Bolívar, the famous liberator of South America from Spain, Venezuelan Interior Minister Diosdado Cabello said Venezuela was the victim of a barbaric, treacherous attack where until now there are 100 deceased and another similar number of wounded. Terrible. Sooner rather than later, it will all backfire on them. He's talking about the U.S. The whole world knows today that Maduro is a prisoner of war. The whole world knows that the U.S. American imperialism violated all the norms of international coexistence, and even today it is violating the norms of its own government. Wow. Okay, so the Interior Minister of Venezuela showing defiance against the United States, so that's not a good sign. And we're hearing now that Chinese refiners of oil are expected to replace Venezuelan oil now with Iranian oil in the coming months. And the White House has selectively started rolling back sanctions on Venezuela to allow for previously sanctioned oil to be sold in the U.S. And the president of Colombia, Gustavo Petro, confirmed that he had a phone call with Trump. And the Foreign Ministry of Colombia posted a statement about it, saying that the foreign ministers of the U.S. and Colombia will be meeting in the White House. And a 35-year-old Chinese national named Qilin Wu has been charged in federal court with illegally photographing Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, home to the advanced B-2 Spirit stealth bombers. Authorities say Wu was spotted in a suspicious minivan near the base on December 2nd, 2025, where he openly admitted to officers he wanted to observe the iconic aircraft. The next day, he returned to the perimeter fence, taking videos of the bombers, along with numerous photos of gates, fencing, and other military equipment. A total of 18 images were discovered on his phone. Wu, who illegally crossed into the U.S. in 2023 near Arizona and was released pending further future immigration earnings, was quickly arrested by ICE. So this guy was arrested in 2023. He crossed illegally, okay, and then he went to Whiteman Air Force Base and was taking pictures of the base, the security on the base. This is just another example that the southern border allows all these agents from our enemies to come in into our country unimpeded. And so, we have to make sure that we keep that southern border locked down. And Iran's Defense Council warned on Monday that the nation could preemptively strike its enemies if it perceived an imminent threat to its security. In a statement, the council warned that Iran's security, independence, and territorial integrity are an uncrossable red line, and any aggression or continuation of hostile behavior will be met with a proportionate and decisive response. It added, the long-standing enemies of this land are pursuing a targeted approach by repeating and intensifying threatening language and interventionist statements in clear conflict with the accepted principles of international law, which is aimed at dismembering our beloved Iran and harming the country's identity. It stressed that Tehran does not consider itself limited to reacting after the fact and considers objective signs of threat as part of the security equation. Okay, so they are considering preemptively striking the U.S. and Israel. All right. And on Monday, we had a large amount of IRGC helicopters and fighter jets deployed throughout the western part of Iran. There were reports of multiple fighter jets flying at low altitudes, and air defenses were placed on high alert. Also, Iranian media said that the country's missile forces have been placed on the highest alert, with preparations to strike designated targets if the situation escalates. And we also have some footage showing Iran deploying radar systems near Tehran and inside of Tehran. And interestingly, 2 U.S. Air Force AC-130 gunships arrived at the RAF Mildenhall in the UK this past weekend, and there was a surge of C-17 flights into RAF Fairford. So we don't know if that was related to seizing the Russian tanker, or if this is related to Iran taking Khamenei and capturing him and bringing him to justice. It could be related to that. Also, the Israeli Homefront Command convened a special briefing with mayors and heads of regional and local councils across Israel. Officials were instructed to prepare for a possible and immediate transition to a state of emergency. So Israel telling local leaders to prepare for a state of emergency. Now, we do know that Israel is going to start a campaign against Lebanon soon. And Iran has started to deploy their special forces units to quell armed uprisings throughout the country, and the riots and protests and the coup d'etat is continuing in Iran, and apparently the last 2 days have been the most violent. We're hearing that the number of deaths in Iran has risen to 36, with more than 2,000 being arrested. But that's the latest breaking news that I have. I might be back later on tonight with more breaking news. And until the next time, take care, God bless, and don't forget the 3 Ps. Prepare, practice, and persevere.